Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. Along with me are our co-hosts, Remy Canario, a political analyst out of New York, and Rick Samuelson, a venture capitalist from the West Coast. Hi, guys. How's it going?
Actually,
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to add a, a philosophical dimension in the topics being discussed in current media. So this week, we're going to discuss the issues, or maybe we should say the issues that the Republicans and Democrats should be discussing. So let's begin. First, we're going to take the Republicans, and I think that they are getting away from the issues that they should be speaking about. They're kind of taking little shots at each other, and I really think that they should be going to the issues that the American people are interested in, such as foreign policy, the economy. It's obviously a weak recovery. And from those two main issues, we can get some sub-issues such as the debt. Obviously, the debt has doubled in the time that President Obama has been in the office. It's gone from 9 trillion to 19 trillion. Obviously, an excessive amount of spending. Taxes. The Republicans could bring up certainly taxes as an issue, it being on the corporate level, obviously the highest in the world, thus producing some inversions, whereby some of the largest corporations in American economy are seeking headquarters and inverting, and that is becoming reverse merger with a foreign company, so that their taxation is considered outside the United States. Individual taxation could be an issue. We certainly have a high individual graduated income tax. Regulations are a burden. They could be talking about regulations of the American economy. I think that I heard that up to 70,000 pages are coming out of regulations are coming out of Washington each year. And another issue would be foreign policy. Foreign policy is obviously there's some problems with it that have occurred in the last 8 years. Not that there weren't any before that, but certainly in the last 8 years there's been some failures. So I think the Republicans should be speaking about these and specifically, I'd like to talk about why the recovery is weak and what they can say about that in their seeking of the office of president. The nature of an economy is that in every case, every transaction is dictated by a sacrifice versus a reward. And the nature of a sacrifice is the risk and the opportunity of each situation, the information and technology and knowledge in every transaction, and the time and effort that the entities put in to produce a product or service and receive a reward for what it produces. And any sacrifices produces a product and service in order to better the life of those involved with the transaction. And and the way that an economy gets better is that it becomes more efficient in its sacrifice. So it wants to produce a larger sacrifice with less reward. So it looks to make more efficient the time that you put in, the effort that you put in, in making your sacrifice. He wants to reduce the risk, increase the opportunity, and produce more knowledge to make the sacrifice more efficient, and thus gaining a greater reward. So if you can imagine a Venn diagram situation of this, you can see that you can make a circle, and within it you make another circle of your sacrifice. And as that sacrifice, the efficiency of the sacrifice becomes greater, the total sacrifice will then decrease in its size, giving more space around it to allot to other rewards, to take other time to invest in something else besides the immediate reward that you're trying to produce. And so the effort, you get more effort. You can allocate effort elsewhere. You can allocate time elsewhere in addition to the rewards that you've been seeking. And this is the very essence of how an economy grows. So, and the primary driver of this efficiency by which all economies grow is through knowledge, and the production of knowledge is being created due to really the invention of the microchip, and it is now accelerating ever faster throughout the economy. Production of knowledge is producing huge efficiencies in many fields. And yet, with this incredible rate of knowledge producing efficiencies in our sacrifice to producing greater rewards, the recovery is weak. So we have to conclude that really it's government intervention in the sacrifice versus reward relationship that is intruding upon it so much that we can't really receive the rewards, and can't really reduce the sacrifices as much as we normally would with this government intervention through regulations. So quickly, I'm going to go to the Democratic side. I think the policies there that they're talking about are equality and fairness and enlargement of social programs that the government should provide. And they're differentiating themselves from the Republicans, probably on purpose. They're truly concerned with these issues, but they'll seek to draw the Republicans away from those that we just mentioned, probably to deflect attention, because the economy and particularly foreign policy have some attendant problems such as the Iranian deal. A lot of people don't like how well that turned out, and what's going on in the Middle East and terror and whether we feel safe, and so anyway, these issues might deflect attention away from really some of the other problems that are in the news. So I'd like to ask our analysts now to make comment on this and what they think that why don't we start with Rick first? You'll cover the Republicans, and then I'm going to ask Remy to cover both and what his thoughts on the platforms or issues on both parties. So Rick, what do you think of the Republicans in the race right now?
Well, I think there haven't been a lot of policy specifics, except really from Jeb Bush, who had the detailed proposals, more detailed than anyone else's. I think Ted Cruz has one significant benefit on his side, and that is he is interpreted as being a strict interpreter of the Constitution, and would really, if he got into office, I think, change the approach to the balance we currently have amongst the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches, in favor of the legislature, frankly. At least that's what appears to be the case. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the executive branch is probably more powerful than it needs to be, and more influential than it needs to be. But leaving those two comments aside, I haven't seen a full-throated defense of traditional conservative policy prescriptions that one would hope for. And I'll give you some examples. You haven't heard much discussion of deterrence. That used to be, with American foreign military policy, a standard approach. And that's why we had troops in Korea. When I was there, 50,000 troops, actually. We had many more than that in Europe for years and years and years. And one of the benefits of that is we didn't have wars. In other words, there's a value in having garrisoning troops in hotspots to prevent war. And it's expensive, and it's not necessarily popular, but it gets results. And I think there needs to be more open discussion of the use of deterrent methods, and that probably implies rebuilding our Navy, for example, so that we can project deterrent power more efficiently. And I'm thinking of China, obviously, in terms of their extremely aggressive posture in the South China Sea, which isn't, is actually an offense to any traditional notion of freedom of navigation. But there they are. You've got bad actors in the world: Iran, China, Russia, and others, and they need to be confronted, not necessarily through a war, but through deterrent. Another thing you don't see discussed much is the use of federal monies to impose policies on the states. I think the 10th Amendment, which reserves all powers in the Constitution that are not explicitly stated to the states, has kind of been lost. And we've reached a situation where the states are apt to just fall in line and are at the trough, in fact, in terms of following policies dictated by the federal government just to get these various subsidies. This also extends to universities as well, who line up at the trough to get various kinds of grants from the federal government and are also subject to their policies to qualify. Well, I think the long-term goal has to be to reduce this interference from the federal government in the activities of the states and in the activities of universities and corporates. So that would serve two purposes. One, it would invigorate the status of the 10th Amendment, and two, it would cut down on federal government expenditures. But to get there is tricky, and I'll give you an example of how it can be tricky. Let's say we were to withdraw all federal support from the universities and leave them stranded. Well, that would be a very difficult situation for the universities to cope with short term. There would have to be some sort of evolution toward that end, or closer to that end, over some stipulated period of time, be it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. That would have to be negotiated. But what if, in order to control the ever rising cost of tuition, you stipulated that the federal subsidy to X university would contract 5% a year unless that university reduces its tuition, whatever, 3% a year or 4% a year, as a means of combating what's rapidly becoming unsustainable debt loads amongst students. I mean, the effective bankruptcy rate is reaching 30% now. These loans simply aren't being serviced. And ultimately, the danger is it's going to end up on the backs of the taxpayers. I haven't seen also a real prioritization of what needs to be done amongst the Republicans. I mean, to me, it's clear economic growth, controlling and or reducing the national debt and the associated federal expenditures, increasing the labor participation rate. And notice I distinguish that from the unemployment rate, which is a phony number and should be scrapped. The labor participation rate captures how many people are actually working, not how many people have left the job market because they got tired of looking. It's not a phony number that is determined by month-on-month deltas. It actually captures how many people are working, and it's the number that needs to be moved upward in order to ensure that both productivity and overall economic growth are optimized. And using that number has a lot of implications. If you scrap the unemployment number, things look much worse. We are still at a 40-year low in terms of labor participation, which is unconscionable. It also has implications for immigration policy, which I consider to be kind of a tertiary priority behind controlling government expenditures and stimulating economic growth, but it is connected. One thing that needs to be addressed, and in this respect, Trump is right, is legal immigration has to be reduced, and it has to be reduced significantly, probably cut in half or 3/4 for the time being, so that we can stimulate the labor participation rate. So leaving the illegal discussion aside for a moment, which is a politically hot issue, that is something that can be addressed in order to reduce the incoming supply of labor, and the inevitable effect will be that demand for that labor will rise in a growing economy. It's a supply and demand issue, and straightforwardly that. We offer 1 million green cards a year. We only generate 2.5 million jobs a year. It's simply not enough to take up the number of new graduates coming into the workforce, net of retirees. So that's why we have this structural problem. That's one of the reasons we have this structural problem. Also, a shortage of labor, an artificially, if you will, induced shortage of labor will force companies to invest in labor-saving devices. There is already a robot which you can buy that can pick strawberries, and it has 16 arms. It can do it much faster than several Mexicans put together. This is inevitably where we will go because it's more efficient and will raise productivity. So there's no reason to stand in the way of that inevitability because if the United States doesn't do it, other countries will do it and take market share in strawberries. It's that simple.
Right.
In terms of the national debt, the only reason the United States has been able to get away with raising its national debt from $11 trillion to now $19 trillion and counting is because of Federal Reserve policy, which has forced interest rates down to levels we've never seen in my lifetime. And now that the Japanese central bank, the European central bank, the Swedish central bank have all gone negative on interest rates, unprecedented, by the way, in all cases. The United States is going to be under enormous pressure to do the same. So the foolish talk on Wall Street about raising interest rates 25 basis points in March or June or whatever it is nonsense. Economically, there's overwhelming pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates into negative territory. And we haven't heard that discussed much yet, but it's coming. And there's also a political dimension to this. Janet Yellen was appointed by President Obama. She knows that if she raises interest rates, the U.S. dollar will continue to march upward as it has. U.S. exports will continue to fall as they do, and corporate profits will continue to tumble.
And the cost of the debt, and the cost to pay for the debt will increase.
Exactly, which gets back to the original point. If interest rates were to ever normalize to 3, 4, even 5%, you find the servicing the national debt would skyrocket. It would rapidly approach $1 trillion a year,
right?
Depending on what rate level we reach, and then it would become a problem, you'd see further rating downgrades for the United States, which unfortunately would raise the cost of servicing the debt even higher.
Right.
So,
Rick, I'm going to have to cut you off because it's Remy's turn here.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, I actually have a little bit of a disagreement here. Watching the Republican race, I would agree that we are not talking about the policies that we need to be talking about. But I do think that something pretty remarkable has happened that has actually brought one of the most important issues that we face into the spotlight, and it's come via Donald Trump largely. And that's addressing the very real fact that the white middle and lower middle class has not had a good time of it over these past 40 years. Now, addressing that issue is I think, one of the key challenges that policymakers are going to face over the next decade plus. Now, I think that the specifics of Trump's platform, his so-called populist message of anti-immigrants, and protectionism, is the wrong way to go about addressing this issue. But I do think that it's a positive development that we're talking about. The fact that the idea that a growing pie raising water lifts all boats hasn't been working out, and I think that it's time for us to really sit down and say, how do we make this modern economy work for everyone? Because the reason why the trade agreements that we signed were put into effect was they were supposed to make everyone better off. Well, they haven't, and now it's time for us to address that. When it comes to the other issues that the Democrats are raising and which ones they're not, I do think that we have a difference of opinion, Chris. I do not think that the reason why foreign policy isn't necessarily in the spotlight as much for the Democrats as it is for the Republicans has a lot to do with the fact that foreign policy is much less of a priority for Democrats than it is for Republicans. The Democrats are much more focused on the economy, and Republicans are much more focused on foreign policy. I also think that to a certain extent, in the Democratic Party, there's the recognition, or at least the sentiment, that while things may not be ideal in the foreign policy realm, and some mistakes may have been made, the reason why we find ourselves in such difficult straits has much more to do with the fact that very difficult circumstances have presented themselves in which there were no good choices, no easy answers, no low-hanging fruit to be picked. So the rise of ISIS and the continued human rights crisis that is Iran, that is Assad with Iranian backing. I mean, if it's a situation where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you intervene, you get Libya, and if you don't, you get Syria. It's you got to pick one. I happen to think that Libya is a better situation than Syria, but there is no answer that's going to provide a clear-cut victory in those kinds of situations. So the lack of focus probably, I believe, has more to do with the sense that we are making the best out of a very difficult situation. When it comes to the economy, I don't think that anyone is really trying to deflect from the issue. I think that the reason that the recovery has been so slow has a lot to do with the fact that it was a financial crisis. And the statistic that I'm most familiar with says that it takes about 7 years to recover from a financial crisis. That's about the timeline that we've followed. So we would expect the economy to grow at a healthy clip in this year. That being said, there are a number of factors around the world, including China's slowdown and the strength of the dollar, that are playing against us. So in my sense, I think things are kind of exactly how you would expect them to be. And for the Democrats more broadly, I think that what our conversation largely is at this point is an argument over how best to address the fact that the nation is polarized, that a lot of our priorities don't seem to be possible to push through. And we are talking about what the best way to move forward given that reality is. Sanders is selling a message of political revolution as the tool to overcome gridlock in Washington, while Clinton is more focused on pulling every lever available to her and fighting and being a warrior in Washington. He knows the tricks, knows the right people, and is going to push things through grit and skill. So that, for me, is the overriding narrative that the Democratic Party has really taken on for this election cycle.
Well, what do you think should be the? We've got about 1 minute to go here. What do you think should be the priorities in putting forth the Democratic talking points during their debates and when they speak to the press?
I think that, and this is a non-conventional opinion, but I think that Trump has demonstrated the importance of the constituency that he's speaking to, and I think that that is actually a constituency that should be voting Democrat. I mean, I think that the Democratic policies preferences are better suited to improving the situation of people who have not benefited from the economy recently. And I think that a set of policy proposals that address the failure of free trade to lift the economic fortunes of the people through distribution policy, that I think the Democratic election would be over very quickly. I do think that the focus on the Black Lives Matter movement is important. It's a conversation that we need to be having. I think that other issues such as gun control, where there's a huge mismatch between popular opinion and the state of politics in Washington, should also continue to be priorities for the Democratic Party. But the real focus is and should be economic matters. And I'm looking forward to seeing more specifics out of both candidates.
Okay. Guys, I want to thank you. We're out of time here for our weekly program, and thanks for everything, and we'll see you all next week on the Philosophical Angle.
Thank you.
Thank you.